So welcome to the tax rate setting webinar today. We are going to keep folks' lines on mute just to reduce the background noise. We do have a chat that's available. So I just sent one, so that should be flashing on your screen. You can chat in your questions as they come up. We will be recording this webinar so that we can share it with folks that were unable to attend with us this afternoon now, I guess it is. So we're going to go over a very high-level process overview of tax rate setting. We'll talk about where the tax rate setting interface is, the workflow that you'll go through to review and approve your local tax rate, which we'll talk about fund balance and overlay as it applies to tax rate setting, and then viewing the draft and final forms and the DRA approval process. So this will be part PowerPoint presentation and part live demonstration. And again, there will be a recorded copy of this available if you'd like to refer back to it. And we'll try to reserve all the questions for the end so that we can cut them out of the recorded webinar and just have a clean presentation. Okay, so getting right into it, we'll take a look at the process overview. It all begins with drafting your warrant articles or resolutions in the system, which gets summed up into your proposed budget, which is your proposed appropriations and your revenue estimates. So obviously you bring that to your town meeting for approval. What comes out of there is your MS-232 or MS-22. So this is your appropriations as voted after your town meeting. Moving a little bit forward in the year, around the summertime, you're submitting your MS-434 or your MS-24. So these are your revised revenue estimates now that you're a little bit further in the year. And I'm going to grossly oversimplify here, but you put in the appropriation, so what you want to spend, less your revised estimated revenue, so how much money you think you're going to take in, subtract those values. That will give you your net appropriations. And then we use the MS1 or MS1V for villages. This comes from your assessor. This is a summation of your total assessed value. So you take your net appropriations, divide them by your total assessed value, and that gives you your tax rate. And again, I'm simplifying the calculation here for this demonstration. And then we move forward to the end of the period. So now your fiscal period's over and you file your MS-535 or your MS-25, DOE-25. So this is the end of year accounting of your actual expenditures and actual revenue. So this is the end of the year. What we're going to be talking about today is just this little portion, the tax rate setting process, what we're concerned about starting right around October 1st. We'll get going with tax rates. So the tax rate manager can be accessed either through, or by clicking on the continue button next to the tax rate, or by clicking on the tax rate tab at the top. They both take you to the same place in the application. Once you get onto the tax rate tab, you'll be able to go in and look at the details of your tax rates and adjust your overlay and fund balance to reduce taxes. That's clicking on the green arrow. And you're also able to print draft and final tax rate reports, which is clicking the printer icon that you see there. So the tax rate setting process begins with your advisor who creates the rate, and they use the overlay and fund balance that you reported on your 434 as the initial estimates for those to set that preliminary rate. Once the advisor reviews and approves it, that then gets sent to you for your municipal review. This is where you will take a look at your tax rate, make sure everything looks good. But the important task that you have is to update your overlay and fund balance to reduce taxes if you want to. And that will allow you to adjust your tax rates live in the application. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. So once you complete your municipal review, it gets sent back to the municipal division supervisor, who does a review and recommends the rate for approval to the director. And the final sign off is when the director signs off on it, and then the rate becomes the final rate that you can use in your billing process. Now, it is important to note that you'll only have visibility into the details of the tax rate during the municipal review and the director review. You'll always be able to run the report though, so you'll always have access to that rate. So taking a look at the tax rate interface, there are a couple components here, and this is going into an actual tax rate. So up at the top, we have a table that has 4 tabs. It has appropriations and revenues, the tax base, overlay and surplus, and then our information tab. The tax rate information is at the bottom, and that's always visible. So that's always at the bottom of the screen. And below that, you have the buttons that you use to complete your review, save your progress, or cancel if you don't want to save and back out. So taking a look, this is zooming into the top tab here. The top table, excuse me. There are 4 tabs for your appropriations and revenues, your tax base, and your overlay and surplus. When you go in, it's going to go straight to your overlay and surplus because those are the values that you can edit. So we see them here: fund balance to reduce taxes, initial estimate from the 434, and your requested overlay. Down at the bottom, you have your tax rate interface. So this is just taking a look at this. You can also minimize the tax rate right up here. It's important to note that you have the calculate link. So if you have made any adjustments, hit the calculate button, and that will recalculate all of your tax rates accordingly. So up here, we have the overlay calculation. So this is showing your initial and final tax effort and the overlay adjustment and the final overlay. We'll talk about this calculation, but basically it's to account for rounding your tax rate to the nearest penny. That makes you collect a little more or a little less taxes depending on which way it rounds. So we'll talk about that calculation in more detail in a moment. So we do have our tax rate table here at the bottom. So we have our 4 components of the tax rate: the municipal, the county, local ed, and state ed. So we have our initial tax effort here. So the money that we'd like to collect, our tax base. So that is the properties that are taxable for that rate or the total valuation of those values. And then we have the tax rate that is a result of those 2 numbers, and that tax rate is rounded to the nearest penny. So the final tax effort is the calculation of using this rate, how much money will you actually collect? And that'll be a little bit different than your initial tax effort, again, because of that rounding. Or it might not be if it didn't need to round, if it came out to an even penny. You'll notice that if you have a village district or for your schools, that money is guaranteed. So that will be the exact amount collected, and then any discrepancies get rolled into the municipal rate and become part of the overlay adjustment. So again, taking a look at that overlay and surplus tab, this is where you make your adjustments to fund balance to reduce taxes, and here is where you make your adjustment to your overlay. And again, hitting that calculate button will recalculate your tax rates for you. So let's take a look more at the overlay and adjustment. So the requested overlay is what you put on your 434. And again, the overlay is the kind of extra money that you're using to account for delinquencies, folks that aren't paying their taxes, late tax payments, that sort of thing. So that's extra money. So you can adjust that accordingly. So let's take a look at how this would work. So let's say we have an initial overlay of $5,900. We have a tax effort, so the amount of money that we want to raise of $775, and a tax base of $1,540. So our tax rate is the effort over the base times 100. So taking a look at that, $5.02. So we don't deal in the 0.2 cents, so we need to round that. So we'll round that to 5.02. So now let's look at what we're actually going to collect. Our actual tax effort is the tax rate times the tax base over 100 will give us the tax effort, so the amount of money that we're actually going to collect. So that's 775, 590, and you see above we wanted to collect 775, 900. So it's a little bit different there because of that rounding of the fractional penny. So looking at the difference of the tax effort that we wanted to collect versus the taxes that we are going to collect, it's $310 different. So we will adjust our overlay by that amount. So essentially accounting for that through our overlay. So that is the calculation there. And again, the system does all of this. This is just to explain why your overlay has an adjustment. It's to account for that rounding and the actual money that you'll need to account for. So let's take a look at the software here for a moment and bear with me as I switch my screens. Okay, so I have logged in here and this is our demo site, so none of this is real. And I'm going to use Ackworth because we always use Ackworth and it is alphabetically the first town. So I'm going to go over to tax rates, and you see I have my preliminary tax rate here of $29. So we have our printer icon here. So this is where we can get access to our tax rate report. And we'll talk about the components of the tax rate report in a little more detail, but just to show you here, this is how you get to the report. And then you can export it out to a number of different formats. If you just want to print it, you can export it out to PDF. That's the easiest. It'll pop open the PDF for us. You'll notice that this tax rate is very heavily watermarked with DRA's logo, and it says preliminary tax rate not finalized on it. So these are not finalized numbers, so that's what you look for. And you'll see down here, it's got more information about the rate. So we'll talk about this report a little bit after, but I just wanted to show you how to export it out here. Again, just the printer icon. So let's take a look here. So I have now gone into the details of the tax rate. It brings us to our overlay and surplus tab to begin with. You see that we do have the amount of overlay that was on the 434, and we have a requested overlay. When you come in, it'll match the original amount that you put on your 434 here. So we'll take a look at that at the end. I just kind of want to walk through the tabs with you quickly. So again, this is what we looked at in the PowerPoint. We've got our tax rates down here at the bottom. Here's our calculate button if we want to recalculate. And just quickly running through, you've got your appropriations and revenue. And note that it shows you which form these came from originally. So this is bringing together a bunch of different forms for you. We can go through, so for our municipal taxes, here's our net tax effort. And DRA does have the ability to adjust or override these values if they need to. It is not done very often, but you can see exactly what was on the form and if it needed to be adjusted. You have your county tax effort. You have your local education tax effort. In this case, we see that we do have a regional school in here as well. We have our state education tax effort. And finally, if we have any villages, they'll be in the village tab here. You have your tax base information. So this is the total valuation of your town with and without utilities. If you had any village districts, they would be shown down here. Overlay and surplus, we'll come back to that in just a moment. And you have your information tab, which gives you some guidance on recommended fund balance retention. So the minimum recommended is 5% up to 17%, and it shows you what those values are. It also gives you some guidance if you want to reduce your taxes by $1, you would have to apply $98,420 from your fund balance, so from your bank account basically, to spend that money rather than collecting it from your taxpayers to reduce the rate by $1. So some additional guidance there. And just comparison of your prior rates with your current rate and what would your current rate look like with your old assessed value. So this is if you had a reval to see what the impact of the revaluation would be on your tax rates, looking at what it would be using last year's taxes. So once again, the tax rates are always down here on the bottom. Let's go ahead and take a look at the overlay and surplus. So these are the two numbers that you would adjust your fund balance to reduce taxes and your requested overlay. So increasing your fund balance to reduce taxes will decrease your overall tax rate. Increasing your overlay will increase your overall tax rate. So we could bring those down a little bit maybe and hit recalculate. It'll redo all of my numbers and that brought down my tax rate a little bit. So you can adjust these and you'll be able to see live the total tax rates displayed up here as well as down below. So you can adjust these as you like. Again, guidance over here on how much you would have to apply for both of those numbers. So fairly straightforward there. Again, you can save your progress down here. When you complete your municipal review, just click this. This will send it back to DRA. Again, remember it goes to the supervisor and then to the director. They do turn these around very quickly. So once it is out of your hands, it's a pretty quick round trip till it's back with a finalized rate. So again, you'd click this when you are done. That will send it back to DRA for that final approval process. You can always save your progress here. You can print out reports if you want to send that off for other folks to look at. So it's pretty simple. I've been dwelling on a lot of stuff here, but basically you're expected to go in, review everything, make sure everything looks good, and then make a decision from the local perspective on how much, if any, fund balance you want to use to reduce taxes, and how much overlay do you want to put into this calculation to accommodate for late payment, non-payment, that sort of stuff. So I'm going to switch back over to the PowerPoint here, and we'll just go over a little bit on the report. And then we'll open it up to any questions. So we have the report here. You'll know that the report is finalized when it looks nice and clean like this. And it will have the director's signature on the front page there. So let's just take a look at the tax rate report here in a little bit more detail. So you have your first page here. This is going to give you an overview of your municipal tax rates, your village rates, and a little bit about your tax commitment. So good detail here on the front of the tax rate report. If we go to the second page, first we have a breakdown of our municipal accounting. So you've got your appropriations and your revenue, war service credits, and your overlay to get you down to the net. So that right-hand column are all negatives. You've got your county apportionment, so the portion of the county's budget that is apportioned to your community. And then your education numbers to get you down to your net local ed and state ed. If you do have any villages here, you'll see your village valuation at the bottom, the MS1V, and then up top the details of the MS1. So this is your valuation coming out of the assessor's office. And there's that commercial industrial construction exemption that if you adopted it, you'll see that number reflected here, which plays into your tax rates as well. Finally, we have the tax commitment. This is the last page of the report, and this is the second thing that you need to do. So you'll get an email saying your tax rate's ready. You'll probably have talked to your advisor on the phone just before, honestly. You go in, you set your overlay and fund balance to reduce taxes, you send it back over. You wait to get the email saying your tax rate is finalized. When it's finalized, you'll go in, you'll print off your tax rate report, and then this tax commitment verification needs to be filled out and sent back by your tax collector. So this is actually the end of the process, is going in, putting in the commitment amount. So you're committing to collect within 0.5% of that amount. You put in your TIF adjustment and then sign it and upload this back into the portal. So just taking a closer look at that so you can see the fields a little bit more. Again, this is part of completing the tax rate. They also have you upload a copy of the bill, and we can take a look at that in just a minute as well. Oh, sorry, that was the second to last page. You also have the fund balance retention guidelines here that show you what you're retaining and what the recommended retention is, so you can kind of see where you are. In this case, this report is showing, we'll zoom in here, is showing that we're retaining 21.65%, which is a little bit above the maximum recommended. So it gives you a little bit of advice on that and kind of shows you where you stand with respect to the recommendations. So I do want to just show you quickly here before we open it up for questions. If I go back to my home tab, you do have the tax commitment verification form, the 1.5 sheet, 1.5% verification sheet. You'll be able to get your final tax rate here. You can also get it in the tax rate tab. And you do have to upload your final issue tax warrant summary and bill. So there are a couple of things here on this administrative tab that DRA will want you to upload to really finish the process. So keep that in mind. Once you do get your final tax rate, there are a couple more boxes to check before you're completely done with the process. So I'm going to put up here my last slide. So you do have a number of support resources. You have your municipal advisor or the supervisor, and you have Axiomatic tech support, and there's the contact info for that. If you don't know who your advisor is, that is right on the home tab. That gives you your advisor information, email, and telephone. So how to decide, do you call your advisor for help or do you call Axiomatic? If you don't know what you should be doing, i.e. how much overlay should I use? How does my overlay compare to other towns my size overlay? What do I do with the fund balance? Anything like that, that would be a question for your advisor. If you know exactly what you want to do, but you can't seem to make the system do it, that would be a question for Axiomatic. If you've forgotten your username, you can't get access to the system, something doesn't seem to be working right, or you just forgot how to do it. We have multiple support numbers. You can email for support. You can go to the support website for help documentation. Clicking on the help button there that you see on the screen actually brings you to a pretty good knowledge base. It has recordings of trainings like this, and it has how-tos for all the common things that you want to do. But we do have those help resources available to you during normal business hours, so please feel free to use those. I know we do have a lot of MS1 extensions out there, so that is very normal. If you're a town that has done that, you are not alone. So with that, I can open it up to any questions here. If you do want to ask a question, just go ahead and unmute your line.